Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Draft FM, your only source for underground draft information. Today, I'm joined to begin by our two college football experts, Parker Fleming, Quinn Maclean. I'll start off with you, Parker. The college football season nearing over. We got the national championship coming up. This will be released on Monday. It'll be on Monday. How are you feeling about the end of the season?
It's it simultaneously feels like it ends too early, but also we've gotten more football this year than we have in years past. So it's kind of nice. It's been a little bit of a grind, and I'm really excited for this matchup. Quinn and I last night went on the channel live. We're breaking it down a little bit. We'll recap it afterwards too. It's gonna be a fun game, man.
Yeah, and man, I've been loving y'all's recaps. So for everyone out there, when there's a game going on in the college football playoff, there's only one more, but make sure to set notifications on SumerSports so that you can catch it live on Twitter. Parker and Quinn are going live. Quinn, Parker said there's been so many football games. I know you wish that your Oregon Ducks would still be playing right now. Unfortunately, they're not. But what are your thoughts on the college football season at large?
Yeah, unfortunately, Ohio State got hot at a very right time, which has been what we see in the NFL playoffs. Is some of these wild card teams go on a run and can beat some of these teams. So it's unfortunate. I'm not going to be this guy that's going to stand on a pedestal. I mean, we need changes in the college football playoff structure, but I think there's a lot louder voices than myself on that. But I just love the expanded football format and the fact that the national championship has a number 7 versus number 8 seed, and which would never happen before with the top 4 teams. So I'm excited to see that game.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny how this year in particular played out, because despite it being the number 7 and 8 seeds, we've ended up in almost this scenario where it's very similar to the NBA, where sometimes, the top teams kind of tank. Obviously, a much smaller sample size in college football, but it feels like Notre Dame and Ohio State were two of the best, if not the two best and most talented teams. Glad it's worked out that they're playing. And frankly, that's not the last bowl, because we do have these 2 all-star games. And so we're going to start off in our first segment breaking down the Shrine game. I've asked you to bring the audience of Draft FM some of the best players to watch, questions to be answered in both of these bowl games as people are watching them and as people are, following along with the draft. We also have Owen Riese coming on in segment 2 to discuss how they actually build up the Shrine Bowl. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to go through the players of the Shrine Bowl, starting with you, Parker. The quarterback position here. I've watched a couple games of Shedeur Sanders, broke them down really deeply. Obviously, we all sat and watched televised copies of Shedeur and the Colorado Buffaloes playing with all the fanfare around them over the years. Shedeur Sanders picks the Shrine Bowl. What are you expecting to see from him?
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think the big questions about him are pressure and processing, right? How does he handle pressure? Last season, about a quarter of the time he was taking a sack. This season, it's down to about a fifth of the time. Still not excellent, even as they got rid of Sean Lewis, kind of moved out of the veer and shoot system and got rid of some of those option routes that were maybe confusing the wide receivers, simplified things. We saw, for instance, in the Alamo Bowl, there are plays that he makes that are a little bit confusing. I want to see how he deals with pressure and deals with processing when he doesn't have familiar targets. Colorado has a bunch of athletes around him. Obviously, Travis Hunter, Jimmy Horn, a late round pick who I think is an unheralded name, all will be very, very, good rhythm with Sanders. And they've had a lot of kind of repertoire. How does he connect and how does he go through processing in a new offense that's not as simplified with new targets? I think those are going to be a lot of questions here. You obviously can't learn too much about these players in these practices and these bowls. But again, we're just getting more information, kind of watching him with those 2 questions lingering.
Shadeur's always said, as you alluded to, the transition from the veer and shoot into the Pat Shurmur system, that he's more of a pro style quarterback. I think this is going to be an opportunity to see that. And as I was going through my eval, the word that I kind of used was he's magnetized to his own blockers sometimes. And I'm really interested to see how that goes now that he will have a lot of folks blocking for him who are expected to be drafted or expected to be NFL players. And speaking of, blocking, the other people who are the product of that is the running back position. This feels like a pretty strong running back class altogether, Quinn. Who do you think people should watch in the Shrine Bowl who may be, jumping up draft boards?
Yeah, I think the name that sticks out for me is Taj Brooks. If you were to end the 2023 season, he was probably one of the most productive running backs in the nation. and you think that he's going to run it back into 2024. He does run it back with 1,400 yards, but it's kind of he and Omarion Hampton and Cameron Scatabo, who, all are kind of in this a Senior Bowl look. So I think this is an opportunity within the field at the Shrine Bowl for him to shine a little bit, no pun intended. But I think from the range of where I've seen him on the consensus big board is as early as a early fourth round to, maybe missing the draft pick. And I think the things for him to improve upon in the Shrine Bowl is, we know he's a power running back. I think he has an opportunity to show himself as a change of pace back. And a lot of that is to show that you're good in pass protection and good in terms of the pass route games. One of the criticisms of Jahmyr Gibbs coming into the NFL is that it was pretty obvious when he was in a run catching mode because he wasn't a great pass blocker. And so these are situations up against premier talent where you're able to kind of show that you can do some of that pass protection bit a little bit. And it helps him to isolate a bit from the Texas Tech offensive line, which has been great this year in terms of like opening those running holes for them. If he's plugged into a new offensive line, can he still show that he's this, valuable running back? I think the things that people will like from him is he's very patient when he hits the hole. And I think he'll shock some people in terms of his athleticism and the route running ability.
It's so interesting because for years, Texas Tech was always the passing place. Taj Brooks, great highlight. Really going to be interesting to see where he sits. And whenever our coaches were bringing us up, particularly for the offensive guys, we were always taught that the thing that got you in the NFL was pass pro. So that's going to be something that I'm closely watching at the practices. Moving on to the wide receivers, Parker. This wide receiver class, not as strong as the one last year. We had a couple players, particularly in the LSU players last year, who were borderline all pros. Guys like Roma Dunze were really felt to be really good coming out. This one, it seems like Luther Burden is going to be number one, but you've highlighted, a number two guy that we need to watch in the Shrine Bowl. Who is that?
Yeah, looking at the class here, especially at the Shrine Bowl, you've got a lot of guys who were very productive. I mentioned Jimmy Horn from Colorado, Will Shepard, LaJohntay Webster, like some guys who have some interesting film on tape. Caden Prather from Maryland, for instance, and Keandre Lambert-Smith from Auburn. Like all of those are very interesting guys who could play good roles. The guy I'm most interested in off the top, I've got a trio here, but starting with Theo Weiss. He was kind of a really interesting transfer a couple years ago to Missouri. He was brought in specifically to be the number two guy, kind of changed the gravity of that offense last year. But here in his second year, it felt like there were some QB issues. It felt like the offense never clicked. They could not get the ball to him in the same way. At one point, he was leading the team in targets, which was by design not how the offense was supposed to go. And the offense had a little bit of a governor of efficiency there. So I kind of want to see him, just some reps, working in with some other receivers, some different quarterbacks, some different concepts, and kind of see how he grades out there. I think he's certainly someone to watch. There's also a pair of G5, I would say, superstars that are going to be here that are really, really interesting. Ricky White from UNLV, super versatile guy, basically 50% of their target share at any point in time. Also a ton of versatility, was a punt blocking literal machine all season. It kind of did some money ball and put him out there. And then Nick Nash from San Jose State was college football's leading receiver, but the competition is a little dubious. A lot of his yards came against very bad competition, and you can only play against the schedule you've seen. This is an opportunity for Nash to prove with the athleticism, the tightness of the route running, that he belongs in this conversation as one of the best wide receivers in this draft.
That's a great point. And we were talking about when we were planning this episode that this is a fun episode because it's just, naming dudes who are great football players. And I think the wide receiver group at the Shrine Bowl is really exciting. Fans of the Sumer Daily podcast know that I love Ricky White. He's been my guy all year. I think he's a certified professional player. Me and Quinn have talked about him before. And another guy, moving on to the tight end position, Quinn, that we've talked a lot about is Gadsden from Syracuse. He's your highlight for this one. We know he's an excellent pass catcher in that almost Kyle Pitts role. And when I went on Syracuse for radio, that was what they were really talking about. But if you had to highlight one thing that he needs to show at the Shrine Bowl that will make him into a primo tight end talent in this draft with guys like Warren from Penn State and Colson Loveland from Michigan, what is that one thing that you want to see?
Yeah, I want to see his ability to break after the catch. He was 6% down our yards after the catch plus minus metric, which is from our advanced analytics, but he has a 95% route running ability for our tight end. So I think he's kind of in this mold of a Johnny Wilson from Florida State that the Eagles converted him to a tight end because he's just big and maybe not as fast as a typical wide receiver. I think Gadsden kind of fits into that mold as well. And so I think with these camps and the premier corners that he'll go up against, is he able to show acceleration and break out of press coverage? Because a guy like him that fits into this new era, big slot, if you will, he's got to show his ability to break out of press coverage and get yards after the catch to be a starting tight end into the league, or else you're talking rotational tight end reps. And I think we see this with a guy of his size, kind of a Darnell Washington, although I don't know if we can compare anyone to Darnell Washington in terms of size and scope, because he's a fourth or sixth extra offensive lineman for the Steelers. But I think he's super strong. He plugs right away, and it speaks to his route running ability that he had 98 targets from Kyle McCord in that pass happy offense this year.
Right.
So he's the guy that I think could move up given his flexibility in a lot of different spots. But with this tight end class is so strong this year as a complete inverse to what the wide receiver class, what we saw last year. And I think that might be, team needs from the NFL perspective. The other guys of this camp, I think worth looking out for is Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt. And then is there the next great Iowa tight end, Luke Lackey, who had a bit of a down year in terms of production, but you can never bet against an Iowa tight end.
Certainly. And tight end is so strong this year. And then I talked to Mike Renner last week. He thought that the edge position moving into the defense was also very strong this year. He thinks that's the strongest group of this draft. Quinn, we'll keep it with you. Looking at the edge position on defense, who are you really looking for over there?
Yeah, the name that sticks out to me is Braden Swinson. He kind of popped off this year for LSU in terms of like being the speed rusher and the next great person off the edge. He kind of started off slow. He was a 3-star recruit at Oregon. He thought he would take a lot of snaps after Kayvon Thibodeau declared for the NFL. When Lanning gave in, he gave him a shot in the first year. Didn't really play a whole lot. His premier snaps at Oregon were the upset win over Ohio State in 2021. I knew I'd get back to the Oregon win over Ohio State in this podcast, but opted to hit the portal. Didn't start much in 2023, and then had that breakout year, as I said, 9 sacks, 58 pressures. A lot of his pressures, though, were against really bad offensive line. So 10 pressures against Oklahoma, which is, had some struggle and a lot of guys that they rotated around. He has the get-off speed and he has the finishing ability. I think the thing he needs to show himself a bit is more of this power rushing to be more of a complete person off the edge, because everything he's shown on tape is more of a finesse rusher. And the other thing he needs to prove upon, and he had 34 solo tackles, 9 missed tackles. And so in terms of your tackle ratio, that's not very great in terms of defensive player. Can he, in the run defense, finish tackles and be this disruptive guy? I think he needs to show a little bit of that power strength at a bowl game like this. Right.
And I think that's the real key here when looking at the matchups between the defensive line and the edges and the offensive line is, a lot of guys can just win with speed at the college level. And that power element is really what adds it in. So we'll go thinking about that from a group that is really strong in this draft to a group like in the entirety of the draft that has some question marks. I think Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell at the top are the primo guys, but Parker, you're a little bit more questioned about this crop that's moving into the Shrine Bowl. Who are some guys that you think, could surprise, even though there's not a ton of huge names?
Yeah, the offensive line, certainly not to disparage the quality of the prospects there. I think there's a lot of guys who will be on NFL rosters, play for many years, and are solid. There is not that much of an exciting prospect really here. You look at Brandon Crenshaw Dixon from Florida has been really productive for a little bit there as well. He probably stands out as kind of the most distinguished prospect there. You look at, Marcus Ware from Montana State, potentially a guy that there's some uncertainty because of FCS. Someone might take a swing on. Logan Brown, an experienced and versatile tackle, is a guy that's creeping up draft boards, getting some film there a little bit. You even look at, Xavier Truss, who's played at Georgia for a couple of years. Could he get kind of this offseason boost from testing, from performances like this, and maybe climb up the draft boards a little bit? I think those are some of the guys that will stand out. Obviously, you've got some staples there like Joe Huber, not to call him not an exciting prospect, but to say like Wisconsin lineman, going to go in the mid rounds, going to be a reliable player, right? Like we've got those guys as well, but the star power is a little bit lacking here in the offensive line department, even as we've got a couple interesting stories down the slate.
Certainly. And I think, again, like you said, there's a bunch of guys who will be productive players. And I think at the college level, it's kind of hard to differentiate, the technique. And I think that's why the Shrine Bowl is so good, because you get to see these high level draft prospects at the defensive lineman positions and at the offensive line really in great detail and understand their technique. And so moving back to the defensive side, into your defensive line, the guys that will be going up against those centers and guards in this game, Parker, who do you think is going to be the best to battle it out with those O-linemen?
Yeah, just a lot of names, a lot of dudes here. Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Kenneth Grant, all very solid athletes, all very, very interesting prospects for NFL teams. Have to shout out Nash Hutmacher from Nebraska there, guy who went over to the wrestling team for a little bit as well, has been really disruptive up front, could be a late round pick. Someone to watch here, very much like a workout grinder kind of guy. Elijah Roberts and Tyler Batty from SMU, or Elijah Roberts from SMU, Tyler Batty from BYU, played on the same field earlier this season. Both, kind of, I'm reluctant to say fringe, but maybe undervalued prospects as well that I think will hear their names after these workouts as more people are familiar with them and kind of see. Two of those guys are really interesting because they were just so integral to their team's success. They're kind of the linchpin of their defense, both in terms of play on field and, some of that motor and get up and kind of leadership as well. So excited to see them interact with other prospects. And some of this, Sam, as you know, is just seeing big dudes walk around on the field, interact with other big dudes. Certainly. And how they handle themselves. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for guys like Roberts and Batty in particular to, be around those other dudes, go up against those linemen and distinguish themselves as well.
Certainly. And I love that you mentioned Kenneth Grant. I talked to Mike Renner last week, and he loved Abdul Carter. So I was looking with Udit Ranasaria, our senior AI fellow over here at SumerSports, and looking at where Abdul Carter ranked in some of his AI metrics. And the takeaway was that he's a great player, but the takeaway was, man, Michigan had some dudes on that defensive line. And so that's one of the things that I'm most excited to see over the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl is just how competitive those Michigan defensive linemen will be, including Kenneth Grant in this game. Let's round out the defense, Quinn. Linebacker, one of my favorite positions, a very interesting one to look at the college level, especially, scheme differences from the NFL. You have to be able to play with a lot more strength and power at the NFL level. Who is someone that you're looking out for as a primo linebacker at the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, the name that pops out to me, Chris Paul Jr., no relation to the NBA player, but just a fun name to remember from Ole Miss this year. Projected a mid-third rounder. I think if he tests well in the 40, he could kind of excel at the draft boards a little bit. Our on-field speed estimates from SumerSports, it has him at a 4.5 right now, but I think he could touch into the 4.4 range, and we're talking about a very fast linebacker at that rate. He excels both in run defense and coverage, which kind of puts him into this new era linebacker, if you will. And he's been used in a lot of different blitz techniques at the Ole Miss defense, which kind of gets him in this range of a Nick Bonito, where you can play off the edge and pass the rusher, but also drop back into coverage, and was the green dot for Ole Miss this year. I think I think that usage a lot in different spots will entice a lot of front offices when they're looking for him into to drafting him this year. He excels in terms of this modern passing game for a linebacker, coverage of wheel routes, which we've seen as a cheat code at the college level, and recognition of screens. So I think that those are two things that he does really well in terms of recognizing. The criticism on him in some caliber is Ole Miss did have a very defensive caliber front in front of him that made his life a bit easier to be able to kind of drop back into coverage and kind of fill into the extra spots. Was he due if he doesn't have that caliber in the NFL? I think is a question mark. So him being mix and match with different personnel units of the Shrine Bowl should hopefully flesh that out a bit. And there's been some times in the run game where he doesn't excel all the way in terms of pursuit of players. That's been some of the criticism of him. But I think a guy like him that's super athletic and a playmaker should be able to entice some front offices a bit.
Right. And an interesting point with the linebacker position, particularly in the draft, is it tends to fall because it's not the most primo position in terms of payment. And given the rookie wage scale, you're not getting as much surplus value in the first round. So we've seen guys like Edge Cooper drop in the draft, despite him being immensely talented, then be able to, make SumerSports' all pro list at the end. So I'll keep an eye on Chris Paul Jr. Could be a great value for a team. Parker, a lot of teams in the NFL have a need at the cornerback position, at the defensive back positions. In particular, one of the comments on my first episode was that the Vikings were looking for DBs, were looking for cornerbacks. That was a real position of need. So help the commenters and the Vikings fans answer a question. Who should they be looking at in the Shrine Bowl to fill that big gap for the Vikings?
Quarterback, I feel, is the position outside of quarterback, Sam, where vibes and just falling in love with a prospect happen more, just more than anywhere else. Like you find a guy and you think, oh, I love the traits. I love the length. I love the burst. And you kind of, there's very bespoke kind of preferences here on cornerbacks and what makes them stand out. There are a couple that really stand out for me. Siobhan Revel from East Carolina was injured, and here's an opportunity to participate in some workouts, put some questions about health to rest, show that his recovery has worked. I think he's one of the clear front runners in this draft overall, and probably if he's 100%. The clear front runner here in this event, and then there's a bunch of interesting prospects that you can look at. Zy Alexander, LSU, is going towards the top of draft boards as well. Again, you can do worse in the draft than drafting veteran SEC defensive backs after long college careers. Elijah Huzzy from North Carolina, maybe a little bit off the radar in some extent due to team success, but I mean he's had a great season, a great career. There's also guys like Jabbar Muhammad and Kobe Bryant from Oregon and from Kansas, very experienced veteran guys going into the draft here. There's a lot of tape on both of them. Can they distinguish themselves matching up against some better wide receivers, some new looks, and maybe make some of those highlight plays to match up to what we expect out of them with their testing and physicality in these workouts?
Great, fellas. Thank you for breaking that down for me. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to bring on Owen Riese to fill y'all in about how the Shrine Bowl gets put together, all these excellent players. Then we're going to bring Quinn and Parker back with a lightning round about the Senior Bowl, which is coming up for 2 weeks. You can listen to their suggestions, grind the film a little bit, look at the stats. Coming back with Owen Riese. He is the assistant director of college scouting at the Shrine Bowl. He's also an assistant offensive line coach at UW-Platteville in Wisconsin. Owen, thank you for joining me. And I want to get into this pretty hot. I'm a huge wrestling fan. The co-host of the SumerSports show is also a huge wrestling fan. She was at the initial episode on Netflix of WWE Raw with all that kind of stuff. And I noticed something a little interesting about your profile. You seem to be a massive ECW guy. RVD, the Sandman, so many great guys. What is it that you loved about ECW?
Yeah, and to be completely honest with you, like I didn't my true beginning of wrestling fandom was in like 2002, right? So ECW had kind of already come and gone. When I first got into it, like Rob Van Dam was my favorite. Right. And I think that's probably the true genesis of it, is that the more you learn about Rob Van Dam, I was like, okay, yeah, cool. So he used to be in this old company, and I was like, okay. And, you start to get like, that was like N64, right? I'm dating myself here a little bit. So you get some of those games, you get ECW Hardcore Revolution, and which was a horrendous video game, just like the old WWF Warzone and other, the pre N64, No Mercy 64 and WrestleMania 2000, right? And so you start to learn all that. And so you go back, and I don't know if it's, I'm not, admittedly, I don't nearly follow the current product as much. I think just like as a preference, the new product is very formulaic, and it seems more produced as opposed to an athletic competition that people are trying to win. And obviously it's right. We know it's not, right. So, but anyways, maybe it's just more of a bit of a nostalgic thing, but, certain character like Raven, I've always thought was a cool, like just like a darker character. I think now in today's pro wrestling, there's very little space for that because everyone's on social media, and even someone like, I'll bring up like someone like Julia Hart from the House of Black and AEW. Right? It's a very dark, mysterious gimmick. But she's a blonde girl that posts pictures on Instagram of her being married to Lee Moriarty, right? So like there's like, and that's fine, right? But it's the little bit of the like suspension of disbelief is kind of gone. And I think I usually kind of go back to pining to those eras when there was a little bit more of that. I'm a huge Steve Corino mark, the king of old school stuff. And so yeah, ECW was cool. And I think honestly, just really like wrestling from like 97 to 03 in general. But yeah, so it's I can't always say that in public, right? Depending on who you're with, you may or may not be able to admit to being a wrestling fan, but yeah, no, it's a bit of a side passion of mine for sure.
Yeah, you're in good hands, because me and Lindsay spent like 10 or 20 minutes on a live show talking about wrestling the other day. And I love to dig into the hardcore a little bit more, and talking about offensive line as well. Like offensive line coach, you gotta love the nitty gritty of the trenches. I also want to ask, you were a GA also at UW Whitewater on our SumerSports All Pro list, which you can find on SumerSports.com right now. We had Quinn Miners, a UW Whitewater alum. What was it like being around him when you were a GA? What was his kind of approach to the game, and how did he go from being, a D3 to an All Pro?
Yeah, I mean, Quinn's just different. That's such a cop out answer. To be honest, when I got to Whitewater, and you're getting to know him, and to be honest, I first saw Quinn the spring before because they had an offensive lineman named Nate Truin the year before, who was a center who had a practice squad with the Buccaneers and a cup of coffee with the Dolphins and a couple others. And I remember being like, who is this number 77 guy? Like, he's insane. He's like crushing people. But at the time I was like, I don't know, he's a sophomore D3 guy, like
Right.
maybe a PFA one day. Right. And so that next fall I get there and it was just so extremely evident, like immediately, like just being around athletics. I know you're with your experience, right? You're just around certain guys where you're like, this is not fair, right? It's just
Exactly.
like the Constitution says all men are created equal, but I think you and I can both agree that's not the case at all.
Not the case in football.
No, and it was just like I said, so immediately apparent that he's just better than everyone physically, and it and really just kind of like from a sheer brute like physicality, like he's just going to move people, and that was extremely fun to be around as a coach. Like from an on-field product, I think the bigger thing though, and that's why we've seen his continued trajectory, is just how he's wired. I think he would tell you that when he was in college, he was not the biggest football IQ guy. I mean, he had an idea what was going on, but like he wasn't looking at like safety structure and trying to figure out coverages and to understand where the immediate threat might have been coming from. And just his willingness to just dive into it, right? Over COVID, we played 19, we played in the national championship game. And then obviously before spring ball, school got shut down, and taught himself how to play center, because heading into his senior year, we're like, well, like, you may be on NFL radars, you should be, but we got to get you ready because you're a 6'3" guard. And, it's harder to get rid of if you can do multiple things. And, taught himself how to snap, right? Because we couldn't coach him. We couldn't be there. He asked his dad's a computer programmer, and he asked our offensive coordinator to put together a list of formations, defensive fronts, and plays to where he could randomize them to where he could simulate getting up to the line of scrimmage, having a formation and a play call, and being able to identify the mic and right. And so like just certain things where he's so proactive and so, kind of the ingenuity to understand that and just say like, I'm going to ensure that I do everything I can. And then, as you know, through sports, when your best players are your best people and your hardest workers, and you combine that commitment to excellence with superior genetics, right? And so what allows a Division III kid that never had a senior year to go to the Senior Bowl and, impress beyond my wildest dreams, I was a biased fan, and I was like, I don't know, man, like I don't think you're just going to go dump all these Pac-12 dudes and Big 12 dudes, and he went and did it. So it's been incredibly rewarding. He's a great kid. I'd probably in touch with him once a month or so, just to kind of shoot him a what's up or congrats or good luck or whatever. But he's I can't speak highly enough. He's I'm extremely proud and more happy for him, right, that he's been able to follow through on his ambitions and his on his path. It's been awesome.
Yeah. And the thing I love about watching minors, so I grew up in South Louisiana. I watched a lot of Sean Payton in my life as a Saints fan. It's his ability to block on screens in open space. Like you noted, like when you first showed up, he was just crushing dudes. Like he's able to do that out on the outside in space, which is so hard to see offensive linemen do. And when you're trying to evaluate that, I'm glad you highlighted the Senior Bowl for him. We're talking about the Shrine Bowl today. Like when you are out there scouting, your goal is to make the most competitive game that the most people will want to watch and the most coaches and scouts will want to come check out. So what's kind of your process to find those guys despite the wide world of college football?
No doubt. So so I work for Eric Galco, Owen's Optimum Scouting, and we are kind of the scouting for the Shrine Bowl. It's honestly an exhausting process, and as we'll kind of get right, like it realistically it's like done by November, So we'll get done with our game, right? Our game is at the end of January. It's January 30th on the NFL Network. Make sure you check it out. And so probably like starting in March or April, we'll start cross checks before the draft. We'll start looking at next year's guys. To your point about creating intrigue and appeal, I think the biggest thing that's different from like actual scouting and recruiting to all-star game scouting is you're looking for upside, right? You're looking for, and I'll use a kid as an example who is actually coming to our game. And I think he's going to be a nice NFL player. Chandler Martin from Memphis is 5'11 and a half, 6 foot,
Yep.
very productive, extremely effective college football player. Ironically, he's not a typical all-star game guy, right? We were happy to have him and he's going to do a great job. But like, to be honest, like for NFL scouts, there isn't a ton of mystery in a slightly sub 6 foot linebacker that has a million tackles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you watch the film and he is exactly what you think he is. He plays really hard. He's going to struggle with length limitations. He's going to struggle to get off blocks. He's extremely savvy to succeed in spite of that, right? But it's a pretty open and shut case with him. To go back to the offensive line, for instance, Thomas Perry from Middlebury, a Division III school up in Vermont, right? That's the epitome of, was on Bruce Feldman's freak lists, right? Is a freak athlete. And this is not a dig at Middlebury College or any of the NESCAC schools. Not a ton of kids up there are getting overcoached, right? Just from a simple, not going to have a ton of full-time coaches, not going to whatever. And so like his upside is immense because he's a very talented athlete and a very good football player, but like is the world that like how much he doesn't know,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all of the growth potential because of things he doesn't have any jaded views on, right? He's never done. And so a kid like that, scouts want to see, right? Because you see the athletic upside and you see you're like, okay, cool. Like they got a small school kid. All right. You know, like how's he going to do against Tonka Hemingway from South Carolina, right? How's he going to do against CJ West from Indiana? And so you get the chance to see that elevated competition, and a lot of it too is again the athletic upside. We kind of talk about with our group when players have reasons, right? Whether it's a high NFS grade or whether it's through like tracking football does a great job. It's a huge resource for us as far as this kid ran 23.1 miles per hour on the GPS, or was a state champion high jumper, or whatever the case may be, right? You understand that athletic profile, and a lot of times you'd be surprised how much that correlates. Not always, but generally correlates to, how good of a football player you may be and how much athletic upside you have. And I think that's something like that. We had BJ Thompson at our game 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Pass rusher, got drafted by the Chiefs, a guy who, when he was at Baylor in his previous stop, won a dunk competition against the Baylor basketball team, right? And now all of a sudden you have a 6'6" kid who, is learning how to play football on the fly essentially and is succeeding, right? He's got a ton of sacks. Like imagine what he's going to do once he gets coached and learns how to play football, right? And so those are the type of things where you put those kids in a stressful environment, you put them with NFL coaching, you put them in a more structured environment, you're able to adjust to and kind of learn their mental capacity and how quickly they process things and how quickly they can apply them. And then again, too, with some of those kids, a small school kid, you're going to see, this will immediately translate. He can rush the passer. He's got to get stronger, right? And we wanted to see that, and we did, right? You get drive block off the line. He's got to get stronger. He's going to be limited early, but that's what kind of helps the scouts complete that picture and moving forward to the combine and then the draft. That helps fill in a lot of those blanks. And now all of a sudden, well, I don't know what this kid is. Now all of a sudden, like, well, I give him a 6th round grade, right? And it creates a more thorough and comprehensive picture of the kid, and that's why you do that, right? It's going to be a great opportunity for Shedeur Sanders is at our game this year. And so for an NFL team that wants to might be in the market for a quarterback, all of a sudden, like, well, you're going to have some pretty immediate firsthand experience with your quarterback coach on how Shedeur takes coaching. How is he in the meeting room? How quick is he to apply it on the field, right? And it's rightfully or not, and probably Shedeur isn't an example of this, but 5 years ago, you got like the Auburn offense, right? Well, I don't know. They just turn to the side and look at a picture, and that's the play they run. How are they going to adapt to these super long, wordy John Gruden play calls, right? And so different things like that. It's a great opportunity for firsthand experience for these kids to be coached by NFL personnel, obviously, and be evaluated by NFL personnel, but then also for the NFL coaches to understand how do these kids learn, right? What did they struggle with? How seriously did they take it? You can kind of tell what their process is like. And realistically, that's where most of the value, I think we'll get to this in a second, but that's where most of the value of these games are, right? I think obviously the end result is an on-field product, and obviously the game itself, we want as much as attendance as we can. The whole game is a fundraiser for Shriners Children's Hospital, which is an extremely deserving cause, and it's a great institution to be paired with for the game. It's been a blessing for that, but realistically, the value for these kids is the interviews with the scouts that they'll do for 8 to 9 hours throughout the week with us, and the coaching and the meeting room time with the NFL coaches. That's the value, I think, is that you can kind of really allow these kids to dip their toes in the water a little bit. And the other thing probably too, as far as like if you're an agent, right, allow these kids to lighten their interview load once they get to the combine, right? Because you got,
Definitely.
I don't know, I talked to all 32 teams in Frisco, Texas, so I might have half of the interviews I had, or I would have if I hadn't. Now all of a sudden I can spend all that extra time getting some sleep and getting ready to try to run a fast 40,
Precisely.
and all that stuff. So I think it's a huge part for us. All that to circle back to the scouting aspect of it, right? Is it's a lot of forecasting, and it's a lot of being able to kind of understand what the NFL may be looking for, and what kids would appeal to that game, and why, and what kids NFL teams would want to try to teach, right? And it's a long process. It's very fluid. We've been replacing kids as of the last 2 days, right? And it's whether they get banged up or they go to the Senior Bowl or they go back to school, or whatever the deal is, it's a huge fluid process, but it's really challenging and it's really rewarding at the end. When I said last year we had 57 draft picks, it was the most draft picks the game's ever had, and when you're able to do a good job with that on the front end, obviously we don't take any of the credit. It's the players that are doing the work, right? But
Exactly.
it is a rewarding experience for us as scouts as well to think we have a little bit of an idea of what we're doing.
Definitely. And so many great things mentioned. I mean, from the coaches to the scouts. You mentioned Shedeur Sanders. Obviously, he's going to be a huge name. He was at the top of our SumerSports mock draft that we did on this show last week. He's top of the consensus big board. Lots of discussions about him versus Cam Ward. Owen, you really have kind of the jump on this. You finished up your evaluation before his invite. And so for the folks that are excited to watch y'all upcoming in 2 Saturdays, what should they really be like? What's the one thing that separates Shedeur from the pack in terms of your evaluation and your team's evaluation of him for this game?
I think for him, it's a fascinating opportunity for him to go out and display who he is to the public, because I think even for a player as highly profiled as Shedeur has been, I still think there's a lot of misunderstanding or like misnomer parts of his game, right? I'm sure we're unfortunately still in the world where some analysts will refer to him as a scrambler because of the amount of melanin that he possesses in his skin. It's things like that. I think he's a precision passer. I think, and I'm not going to, this isn't a secret. This isn't the quarterback class that we had a year ago, right? Obviously, it doesn't have all the pomp and circumstance from that aspect of things. He doesn't have a massive arm, right? He's not this freak athlete. And so it's a little bit different from watching Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or even Mahomes or someone like that. I really just appreciate how he plays the game, right? The ability to play. He does hold the ball longer as an offensive lineman. He holds the ball a lot longer than I would prefer he does, right? But the amount of anticipation and playmaking he's able to make, despite not having these far superior physical tools, and the, I think, greater understanding of the game, I think, than he's given credit for as well. He doesn't really play all that different than he did at Jackson State, right? Just everyone's gotten to see it now. And so I think he's a guy that my comparison for him was a number one pick, I guess. But like, I see him as like Sam Bradford, right?
Okay.
He's a guy that,
it's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't have anything that was like, this is a top 5 NFL trait in this, but he gets the most out of what he's got, right? He's got a good understanding, good football IQ of the game, and able to understand that given his skill set, what he can and can't do. Again, there's still some things, right? He holds the ball a lot. He does certain but we've got a better opportunity to see it this year, right? When he wasn't getting bludgeoned behind a bad offensive line, he was able to make a lot more plays. And so I'm excited to see him as well. It's going to be a fun experience for him. Obviously that's a high profile player at our game, which is exciting for us. And obviously he's going to be playing in AT&T Stadium, which I'm sure had some bit of appeal to him as well.
Definitely.
But no, it's going to be a great opportunity for him. And again, for all these scouts to see him throw live, right? Because realistically, despite the high profile, unless you're a Midlands or Southwest area scout, you probably haven't seen him throw in person, right? And so whether you're a decision maker or not, and so that'll be a big part of it, right? To see, I know we have a partnership with Wilson this year with the footballs for like a throwing session. I think they have data in the footballs and all the fun stuff.
Yep.
But just to see him come out and rip it in person, and for NFL personnel and coaches as well, to how does Shedeur learn, right? How quickly does he pick things up? That's all valuable information and something that he can, while it may not change the media's perception of him or whatever publicly, right? The teams that are going to considering investing in him with a very high level of confidence, right? That's a huge opportunity for him to show them that.
Yeah. And I'm so excited to see him in a new context. And it's not a dump on him, because they've been so successful. They've went from last to one of the better teams in the country, but he has been coached by his dad most of his career. And so to see him in a new context, it's going to really be interesting to see him thrive in Dallas, January 30th, as you said, at 7 p.m. Last question for you just before you leave. All I need is 2 words. One person to watch. Your favorite prospect, first and last name. Who is that in this game?
You're going to put me on the spot. I'm going to go, and this is selfish, I'm going to go with Fidel Diggs, the pass rusher from Syracuse. He was at He was at Texas A&M a year ago. Yep. At Texas A&M, he had a lot of flashes. Wasn't always super consistent, right? And we got to see that this year a little bit at Syracuse, put it together a little more. I still think, and again, in a draft class where pass rushers are, I mean, there's a couple high-end ones, but it's really not this like stocked throughout. A kid like Fidel Diggs, who has a definite skill set of, I have the twitch to win outside around the corner. Definitely. In this class, I think it's something that he's got a chance to really kind of whoop up on some of these tackles and make himself some money. In that same vein, I'm going to cheat. In that same vein, Tyler Barron from Miami, formerly of Tennessee, and Johnny Walker Jr. That's the one I'll actually probably like stand on the table for. Is a kid who does not have superior physical traits, right? Is not a freak athlete. I hate to helmet scout like this, but I think he's Shane Ray, probably going to get drafted at the appropriate time, right? He's a snap jumper who is a edge rusher who can bend around the corner, but isn't going to run a 4.5, right? That's not him. He's got a lot of savvy. I think he understands his skill set and plays to it. He's a guy too, and maybe we talk about a kid with some appeal, right? There's a ton of value as a rookie to have a definitive and known skill set of what you are going to do, right? What will be your role as a rookie? There's a lot of kids that come into camp and they're like, oh, well, we're going to see, right? If you draft Johnny Walker, you are getting a pass rusher, a designated pass rusher, may never be a full 3-down guy, right? But he's going to come in as a rookie with a skill that he's able to immediately translate to. And that's huge for scouts and coaches, because right? The draft is an extremely unsure science, right? But when you can cheat a little bit, and if you have a little bit of an idea of at least how you will utilize a kid, I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
Definitely. I love the initial pick. I've been following Syracuse all year. He was a name I had preseason, and it was a name that came up time and time again. So Owen, thank you so much for joining us again. The Shrine Bowl, January 30th, AT&T Stadium. If you're in the Dallas area, NFL Network. If you'd like to watch, you can catch that at 7 p.m. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam.
All right. We want to thank Owen for coming on. Lots of great stuff there. Quinn and Parker, thanks for coming back. We got the Senior Bowl coming up in 2 weeks. You can watch that on Saturday on NFL Network. If you got to scratch an itch right before the Super Bowl, you got to watch some more football. Fellas, there's a lot of big names in the Senior Bowl. And I want to do a lightning round through them. I want to name, the top guys, what we should be looking for. So Quinn, let's start up at the quarterback position. This could be a battle for the quarterback 3 position in this draft class between Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart. Who do you think kind of wins that battle, and why do you think that could be the case?
Yeah, and don't forget about Dylan Gabriel too.
Dylan Gabriel as well. Good point.
Into that too. I think the headliner of this going in will be Jalen Milroe, given the bowl game performance, and to show that he's just not a mobile guy. He has the arm strength. We've seen it. And we've seen camps like this start to pop some people's expected draft position. We all remember where we were when we saw Zach Wilson and Malik Willis at a pro day and throw it, but chuck it as far as they can down the field. I think the name that I think will be sneaky and kind of jump up the draft ords a little bit is Jackson Dart. I mean, right now he's projected late 2nd round, early 3rd, as high as early 2nd round in some mocks that I've seen. He has the production that I think NFL caliber, front offices look for in terms of evaluating a player further. 10,000 passing yards in his career, 72 career touchdowns and 38 starts. Transfer from USC to Ole Miss. He's 99 percentile in terms of our passing production metric here at SumerSports, and 97 percentile in terms of throwing accuracy. So those are like the the disqualifiers from a quarterback from an evaluation standpoint. I think the things that kind of set you above and beyond in terms of evaluating a quarterback in the next level is arm strength, right? What better way to showcase your arm strength ability in terms of this camp? We had him 68 percentile in terms of big throw ability in our SumerSports metric. I think that's an area where he can kind of like separate himself a bit. And I think the big thing with this QB class overall is who is going to show that they had the best pocket management. I think that's kind of an issue across the board with a lot of these QB prospects. And Jackson Dart is no difference here. Sacked 30 times in college, 60% pressure to sack rate, 50% in terms of percentile in terms of our sack avoidance metric here at SumerSports. If he can show some of that footwork in the pocket and show some of those deep throws in camp, I think that you're going to have an NFL front office move up the boards to get him a little bit.
And speaking of guys moving up boards, moving on in the running back position, Parker, the film is starting to agree with the analytics, and the analytics are starting to agree with the counting stats. Cam Skattebo is that dude. He's going to be playing in the Senior Bowl. A lot of college coaches who may doubt his speed, even though here at SumerSports we've seen him make big leaps in speed, who doubt his athleticism, even though we've seen him have immense contact balance all year. Their questions will be answered here. Do you think he comes out of this, as one of the top running backs, maybe jumps around or something like that in the eyes of the consensus? Or do you think some of these other guys, because there's a lot of talented folks there, maybe win the day at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, the room here is so stacked. So you just wonder about, reps generally. There's, I think with the exception of like 3 guys in the running back room, there's a lot to be excited here about. I mean, you could list all these names, just guys that have had super prolific careers, kind of 5th, 6th year guys even. RJ Harvey from UCF, one of the most effective rushers in the nation. Devin Neal at Kansas. Damian Martinez from Miami. Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, who had an amazing year last year. Woody Marks coming out of USC and maybe being underutilized, still having great great efficiency numbers. Khalil Mullings from Michigan, who kind of won a starting job that probably wasn't his in preseason and was so good for them. Trevor Etienne from Georgia. I mean, so many experienced guys. There are some looming questions of, okay, why didn't you declare already? Like, why are you still here in college? And obviously NIL changes that equation a little bit, but I want to see how some of these guys separate with limited reps. Honestly, I think the best thing about this running back room is you get to watch the defenders tackle guys that are so dang hard to bring down. I think you're going to get some quality reps there and kind of see how they do against them. Shout out to Bashul Tutton from Virginia Tech. Very similar yards after contact profile to like Ashton Jeanty with a worse offensive line. So maybe a sleeper there guy who surprises here and can kind of rise up. Yeah, but it is a stacked running back room here.
I'm just excited because, like former teammate of mine, Tajay Spears, saw a huge jump after the Senior Bowl. And when you have this many talented guys, I think there could be a lot of reshuffling of this running back class and thus of the draft as well. I'm laughing because as we move forward to the wide receivers, Quinn, you highlighted a guy that you really liked in Jalen Royals, and Parker, you just in all caps said, fun player. So Quinn, give us, the high level things that we should look for. And Parker, tell us why this is a guy who just may end up being a great pro.
Yeah, Jalen Royals there's a lot to like in him. 2-star product coming out, so very undervalued guy going to Utah State. Had a down year production wise in 2024 compared to what we saw in 2023. 2023, 94 targets for 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. Got injured a little bit. They had a foot injury that kind of sidelined him for a few games. So I think there's that question mark going into the Senior Bowl is how has he bounced back from the injury? But in terms, if you want to watch a fast guy, this is it, right? Like, he's 99 percentile in terms of yards after catch plus minus. He's 96 percentile in terms of our route running ability. He also has value in punt returning and kick returning, which will get him early snaps onto the field. Kind of reminds me of a Marvin Mims comp, trying to get onto the field in terms of a punt kick returner, but excelling into that wide receiver. I think I think he's kind of fits into this classic wide receiver Z mold. You have your, strong guy on the other side. He's just a burner on the other side to get catches, and he's actually a decent contested catch guy for his frame of being at 193 pounds. I think there's the things that need to show for a wide receiver is how well are you in run blocking. I think it's kind of a disqualifier for a lot of NFL clubs, and the same thing in terms of that dings a lot of these skinnier wide receivers. We saw Troy Franklin, dip 3-4 rounds last year because of his play strength. How can you show that against like more stronger cornerbacks in terms of the Senior Bowl? I think is something that Jalen Royals will have to kind of prove himself a little bit. The other wide receiver to look out for, and I'll jump into Parker here, is Ty Felton. If you're looking for a late round guy that has route running ability in this Puka Nacua, their next Puka Nacua people are looking for, I think Ty Felton might be that guy. He absolutely is so fun to watch, his route runner ability, in addition to Jalen Royals. So those are the two guys I look out for.
Dude, Royals talk about bloom where you're planted. Like at Utah State, doesn't transfer. Their offense is kind of a mixed bag. They have some issues here and there, but last season, lines up outside primarily, 72.7 contested target catch rate. This season, he moves in. He's taken about 25% of his snaps in the slot before the injury. Average depth of target comes way down. His yards after catch stays the same. Like it goes up even a little bit this season. I mean, just finding ways to move with the ball. You love to see that out of a guy being able to be deployed in different ways and excel. I mean, this wide receiver room is so fun. We could go forever in this. Like Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, go look at where he lined up. Like as they moved him closer and closer to the ball from Iowa State, he developed really well as a prospect. There's so many guys here who've just had a great career development that are getting the opportunity to show off here. I love some of these later round wide receiver guys for sure.
And it feels like you can always catch some value in the late round wide receiver. Like Quinn, you noted people are always looking for the Puka Nacua. Michael Thomas is a guy, as a Saints fan, who comes to mind of like, second, third round, a guy that like wasn't considered one of the best, but ends up being a great player. And I think that's probably going to be the case with the tight end position as well this year, Parker, outside of Warren, Colson, Loveland at the top. It seems like there's guys like Gunnar Helm that you could get a good look at and maybe end up being a guy 2 or 3 years down the line. Who are some of the other guys at the Senior Bowl that you're looking forward to checking out?
Yeah. Looking at tight end, I got excited about Jalen Royal there and looked at a stat, but we're transitioning to tight end here. We're doing it live. That's wonderful. Helm, took a ton of volume from Texas. Really, really interesting. Gavin Bartholomew from Pitt, a very more traditional tight end in line a lot as well. Two guys that I think are really standing out here. Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. I don't know how you watch college football this year and you don't know who that is, but man, he was just all over the place, running tight end leaks, outside running wide receiver routes. I mean, just very, very productive player. Was the entire offense. You knew that your entire game plan was find where Hannon is, and somehow the man just gets open. I like his abilities, what he brings to an offense as maybe an ancillary piece. Jake Brenningstool from Clemson, a little bit underrated, very highly rated recruit. Production wasn't there. The offense has struggled a little bit, really came into his own this year. And again, traditional tight end, I think will be a name that goes a little bit later than we expect, but then definitely outplays his draft slot.
Harold Fannin is one of the guys that I am going to have my eyes locked on the entire time because his production at the college level was fantastic. I want to see if he can do it against some of these stronger guys. Moving on to the offensive line position, Quinn. Again, this is one that I just absolutely love to watch in these settings. And I think it's a position where we can get, a lot of juice from watching those matchups with the eye test. And who are some guys that you think may pop at the Senior Bowl this year?
Yeah, the leading guy I'm looking to watch is Wyatt Millen. Like in terms of a statistical profile from an analytics perspective, he fits all the boxes for us. He's 99 percentile in our all-in-one run blocking, 93 percentile in our all-in-one pass blocking. He's really good at sustaining blocks over time, which was needed in that West Virginia offense when the receivers were unable to kind of separate. 87 percentile in terms of our advanced metric there. And he's really good against speed rusher. He's got 81 for 81st percentile in terms of that first step ability to going up against speed rushers. A cool stat about him is he hasn't allowed a sack since 2021 and only 6 pressures allowed this entire season. But that kind of gets into a couple things that are maybe a downside. Right now, he's number 40 on the consensus big board. I think if he has a couple good camps, combine, he could slip into the first round a bit. This guy speaks his ability to me. Like, this is a Texans fit. We know they need offensive line help for the Texans continuously. And he's a guy that I think this is a swing offensive line that could go left tackle, right tackle, swing inside. I think because the criticism on him, maybe the quality of competition against, his worst game was against the Dave Aranda's defense, where we know Dave Aranda likes to do the simulated pressure. So if you're a defensive coordinator going up against him and you're mixing a lot of different disguises in terms of your blitz, that seems to be the game that he struggled against. And I guarantee that evaluators will be watching that game film in terms of evaluating him a little bit more closely. The other criticism on him in terms of and we know this, we've talked to scouts, is they have these, your disqualifiers in terms of body measurements, right? 32-inch arms. This kind of gets in the conversation of Peter Skronsky a few years ago, where he played excellent as a left tackle in college, but in terms of the body build of an offensive lineman in the NFL, you move him inside because of that. This kind of feels like a very similar situation for Wyatt Millum. And so going up against premier defensive line talent at the Senior Bowl, I just wonder how he can hold up in terms of those reps. So I'm excited to watch him in the Senior Bowl in coming weeks.
It's going to be really exciting. And those things that seem to matter or don't matter, it's such a weird item. And I hope, particularly with some of the great stuff that we've been working on at SumerSports, particularly with regards to the offensive defensive line, we can get away from those, hard blocks. But that's not going to be a problem at the edge position, Parker, because we have some guys who are just studs. We have some guys who are at the top of the consensus big board. Nick Scourton, is a guy that has succeeded 2 different spots. There's a lot of juice in the Senior Bowl at the edge position. Who are you most excited to see?
Yeah, can't mention the room without Nick Scourton there, the Purdue transfer to Texas A&M. Just a gravity-changing edge rusher who has to be accounted for on every play. Potentially a fringe top 5 guy, depending on what happens with the quarterbacks. Definitely looking at getting mocked in the top 10 here, and will be a really valuable addition at a key position for an NFL team. Princely Yu out of Ole Miss. I won't try to botch his last name. Apologies to the young man, but again, just another gravity-changing edge. Did a great job. Was playing alongside some NFL talent and Walter Nolan and some other guys on that defensive line. So want to see him, in some drills, walk around other big dudes, get some reps there. He's a guy who is, fringe round 1 right now with a good Senior Bowl performance and a good combine, could get one of these late 20s teams to fall in love with him, get that first round money and make an addition to a team. So a lot on the line for him. Same for Kyle Kennard from South Carolina. But all 3 of these guys, 30, 36 plus sacks. I mean, just excellent, productive guys, even as they're being accounted for, even as they're being doubled, even as they're being schemed away. So really hard to ignore the top talent here as what's on the line for those last 2 guys being able to kind of sneak into that first round, improve their draft stock here as well.
So to keep it in the defensive line room, Quinn, I'm loving your breakdown of Deion Walker from Kentucky. I mean, I'm just going to turn it over to you because there's so much juice here, and I think this is a guy who we could really see pop up.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this guy's massive, 6'7", 350 pounds. I think the thing that'll be attractive to NFL front offices is that he turns 21 in March. So he's still like young guy that's still learning the game of football that can be, with his frame and what he's done at the college level, is very attractive to NFL front offices. He's a very above average pass rusher is what we've seen. Because of his size, he opts more towards this bull rushing approach. So I think at the Senior Bowl, his way to improve himself is to show more of those finesse and the get off speed. We have him 23rd percentile in terms of pass rush get off, more of a better finisher overall. I think this is a guy when you get to the combine, and I'm fingers crossed that he could participate. You're just watching him at the bench press, like see if he can shatter some records there of how big he is. I think the thing that's fun about this guy too is he anticipates in the run game, and he uses the O-lines to his advantage to kind of plug some holes and then shed him off to that. I think the concern I've seen on him is because he's so damn tall, his pad level to get to those offensive linemen and try to get underneath them. But, I think this is a guy who the Cowboys, when they're drafting Mozzie Smith, this is who I think they envisioned in terms of that run defender, and you hopefully develop him into an above average pass rusher, which he's shown the ability of. I think he just needs to work on a few different tools. The other thing about him that I think is exciting for NFL front office is that he excels a lot in terms of stunting situations. So that just means that he can get into a rotational depth pretty early on in the NFL because he can plug and play and get those simulated pressures. I know that's not the definition of simulated pressures, but more manufactured pressures for an NFL defensive line. So I think that's what's very attractive from Deion Walker is both he's young and he's shown a lot of capability of a starter in the NFL.
Definitely. And look, I'm but a simple man, fellas. I love professional wrestling. We talked about it a little bit with Owen prior to this segment, but you tell me 6'7", 350, I turn into one of the old school wrestling promoters, and I'm just like, come on, bring him here. Let's see what he can do. So I'm really excited to see this player play. Moving on to the linebacker position, Parker. Again, just like a ton of interesting versatility things that we want to see, particularly kind of in those late rounds as players try to fit into defenses that are adapting to how offenses are attacking them at the NFL level. Who do you think are some guys that could fit in there at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, linebacker is always a position, Sam, in the draft that annoys me because we call a lot of guys a linebacker, and linebacker can mean a lot of different things here. So there are some different profiles here. You've got, Shamar James, Smal Munden from Georgia are kind of two guys, athletic SEC dual threat guys that can be very, both active in the run stopping and in the pass rush. And then you've got guys like Cody Lindenberg from Minnesota, who's hard-nosed run defensive linebacker. Is there a fit? I feel like that almost matters more than, we know his quality, but is there going to be a fit in the draft early enough to kind of let him slide in? Is this an opportunity for him to show some of that coverage ability, maybe that he wasn't asked to do as much in the defensive front at Minnesota there, being a run stopping guy? So interesting to see how he goes through drills and how he plays in this game. Two guys from Oklahoma State I think are worth mentioning just because they've had a weird couple of years there, but Colin Oliver and Nick Martin are very versatile. Some position switching there for Oliver. They're late round guys. You think about versatile defenders out of Oklahoma State. Malcolm Rodriguez comes to mind. I mean, there's just some really interesting players there. These guys are both front seven, more so than defensive back like Rodriguez was. But I still think hard-nosed defenders that are very, very impressive athletes and should grade out very well here, help their draft stock a lot.
Yeah, and you mentioned fit. I think that's why the Senior Bowl is so cool, because you have all these NFL coaches, right, being able to work out guys in the way that they kind of want to see it, even to at the point this year. Zach Vaughn was a guy you mentioned, the ability to cover, the versatility. He was a guy who came into the league as an off-ball guy. The Saints wanted to move him back into the off-ball rather than on the line, and all of a sudden, tides change. All of a sudden he's the Eagles. All of a sudden he's basically a unanimous All-Pro. So I think we could definitely see some of that from these guys as well. Finishing it off, Quinn, the defensive backfield. Again, a lot of versatility out here. You have someone highlighted who is pretty versatile as well.
Yeah, Andrew Makuba from Texas this year. We've seen a lot of different fits as a defensive back. He's played corner, he's played slot, he's played in the two high safeties as well. 71 in our consensus big board right now. I think the attractiveness of being able to move him around in a lot of different defensive backs is what will probably get a lot of front offices to evaluate him further and see what kind of fit they have in terms of his defense. But that's great if you're a secondary person in the draft, is you want to be able to fit into whatever scheme you can go into. I think the thing for him in terms of the Senior Bowl is because of how good the Texas secondary were this year, Jahdae Barron, Malik Muhammad, Michael Taft, he kind of gets a little bit lost in terms of the names, but he was, 99 percentile on our all-in-one coverage metric this year, 59 total tackles, 11 missed tackles, 4 interceptions, 6 pass breakups. I think the concerns about him is tackle quality was what we talked about as well. 30 missed tackles in college, which is a lot for a safety in a corner, especially in ones. And I think part of that is just over pursuit. Some of the criticism, on him is that change of direction. He has some bad form in terms of that. I think that's stuff that's coachable at the next level. If you get a premier defensive backs coach to really turn your hips a little bit, if he's working on this up until the combine stuff, I think that's something that can elevate him into the next level. His best game overall is when we talk about like on our advanced metrics, we do a lot of opponent adjustment at the college level. You want to look for guys that are popping in good games. His best game was in the SEC championship against Georgia, where he had 13 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. He's really good in press coverages, which will bode well for him in terms of matching up against both slot receivers and tight ends. And he's a guy that's really good in terms of run pursuit and open field tackling. I think in times he gets over pursuit, which has caused a lot of his missed tackles, but I think that those are things that are teachable. So a very exciting name for me. I thought he would have declared last year out of Clemson, but then he transferred to Texas and becomes kind of a part of that premier defensive back room.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a great thing to kind of finish off our pod here, is that you got to look at what these dudes do well, because as you mentioned, it's all about coaching at the next level. A good, high-quality NFL level coach can probably coach these guys into good stuff. So you're looking at what these guys can do well. And then also a player like this, the slot cornerback position, particularly depth at the slot cornerback position, has become so important at the NFL level. We see two teams in the Ravens who, once they move Marlon Humphrey kind of more into that slot cornerback position, all of a sudden, it all clicked and they become one of the better defenses in the league. And then the Lions have depth at it. They can move Brian Branch into that slot corner position when injuries arise. and maintain kind of the level of defense that they'd have. So really going to be interesting to see how Makuba goes to the next level, given that he does have a skill that probably translates a little bit better to the NFL than it does in college. But Parker, Quinn, I want to thank y'all so much for joining Draft FM. This is an incredible corpus of work that y'all have put together. I cannot wait to revisit this list after the Senior Bowl, after the Shrine Bowl, middle of the draft, and even after these guys get drafted. So I thank you very much for joining me. Signing off from SumerSports, he's Quinn Maclean. He's Parker Fleming. I'm Sam Brookhouse. Thank you for listening.